Hello, and welcome to Legally Speaking, a production of the Macomb County Bar Foundation and Lakeshore Legal Aid. According to the National Council on Behavioral Health, 30% of active duty and reserve military personnel deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan have a mental health condition requiring treatment. That's approximately 730,000 men and women, with many experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder and major depression. Isolation and stress resulting from the pandemic has only increased these struggles for many veterans. According to NBC News, the massive loss of life and ever-present fear of an unseen threat have been triggers for veterans grappling with combat-related trauma. Last spring, the Wounded Warrior Project surveyed 30,000 injured veterans and found that over half reported declines in mental health during the pandemic. Veterans with PTSD or depression were 3 times as likely to face hardships during the pandemic. Hardships like decline in mental, physical, and social welfare, including unemployment and other concerns about money. Today on Legally Speaking, we will talk with 3 advocates who work to connect veterans with resources, support, and for those combat soldiers involved in the criminal justice system, a path for living a life of safety and sobriety. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legally Speaking. I'm Ashley Lowe, Chief Executive Officer of Lakeshore Legal Aid, a nonprofit law firm that provides free civil legal services to low-income people, seniors, and survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault throughout Michigan. Our 3 guests today are dedicated to helping veterans facing challenges once they return home after serving our country. I'd first like to welcome Gary Tanner. Gary's a U.S. Army veteran who has continued his service to our country and fellow veterans through the work in the American Legion. Among his many efforts, he's a member of the American Legion National Security Commission and the Reconnect Committee Chairman for the American Legion Department of Michigan. He founded the Michigan Wounded and Returning Warriors Program, and he's on the Advisory Committee and Executive Board of the 19th Judicial Veterans Treatment Court. And in 2012, he was named the Michigan Veteran of the Year. Gary, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Ashley.
Our next guest is Nanette Colling. Nanette is the Veteran Justice Outreach Specialist for the John Dingell VA Medical Center in Detroit. As a licensed master's level social worker, Nanette has helped thousands of veterans avoid getting incarcerated and avoid homelessness. She's assisted in courts in setting up veterans treatment courts throughout the Detroit metro area and jail outreach programs. She's involved with the 36th District Court stand down, and she organized the first child support seminar for homeless veterans. She's also organized the Oakland County's first Veterans Fair with over 35 vendors and providing services to over 100 veterans. In 2011 and 2012, she received a special award of appreciation for her services to veterans. Nanette, I'm so happy you could join us today.
Thank you, Ashley. It's nice to be here.
And our third guest is Oakland County Circuit Judge Nancy Grant. Judge Grant is the founding and presiding judge of the Michigan Combat Veterans Treatment Court. Judge Grant was the chief circuit judge in the 6th Circuit Court in Oakland County from 2009 to 2017. She chaired the Michigan Judicial Tenure Commission, and she's a former president of the Michigan Judges Association. She's also been honored for her work. She was recognized by Crane's Business and the Detroit Free Press for her efforts. She is also recognized by the Oakland County Bar Association and received their Professionalism Award. And in 2016, she received the State Bar's Champion of Justice Award. Judge, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ashley. And again, I'm honored that you asked me to be here, and I'm honored to be here with Gary and Nanette.
Thanks. Well, Judge Grant, let's start by talking about the Oakland County Combat Veterans Court. Can you talk about what led you to create this court?
Sure. It started back in 2013 when one of the probation liaisons, it's the liaison between the Michigan Department of Corrections and the Circuit Court, came to me and said, we seem to be having specific issues with combat vets in successfully completing probation. Would you mind talking to them? And I literally would have, they weren't necessarily, no, they weren't on my docket at first. I would just have men come into my chambers, and I would sit down and talk to them and said, what seems to be the problem? Where are your struggles? And it usually became this ongoing theme of they lost their units. they didn't want to burden their families with what was going on and how they were struggling. And so it became an issue that I identified, that specifically combat veterans who were in our judicial system because of their time and what had happened to them, and obviously a lot of self-medication going on, PTSD, trauma, that it evolved into specifically forming a court for combat veterans to make sure that they could successfully complete probation and get the services that they need and are entitled to.
Judge, how is this different from other veterans treatment courts?
Most importantly, there's a word that's in my court, the court, called combat. I believe there are veteran treatment courts, and Nanette could probably back me up on that, in almost every single circuit and almost every single district in Michigan. But there's only one combat veterans treatment court, and that's because I developed, along with many others, a specific mission to treat those who put themselves in harm's way. And so they would be getting the attention that I believe that they deserved. And when I say in harm's way, it starts off as combat veterans, but we also will take a first responder who is search and rescue, worse, a search and recovery, and they have trauma because of their service and because of what they have done for us and stood in line for us.
And so
that's unique. I think I was only the second one in the entire country that had one. The first one was in California, the Combat Veterans Treatment Court.
So focus specifically on the combat element of it rather than
Exactly.
just the status as being a veteran.
Right.
And you started this court back in 2013. Has it changed in that time? Has it evolved?
Huge. I'm very proud to say, first of all, we have Nanette. And when you get to her, you're going to see the amazing work that she does in hooking up the defendants with the treatment that they need. But it evolved from coming into my chambers and let's having a chit chat, person to person, citizen to citizen, to a whole range of services are available, mentors, which is the biggest key, which is people that have been in those shoes, meaning they've gone to combat, they've come back. And in our case, our mentors have actually gone through our court system and have been through the program and understand what it takes. So what has happened is that these defendants get a whole new unit that they lost when they left service. And so and now because of our new prosecutor, we now have so we have meetings, we have a defense counsel there who can tell us their point of view. We have all kinds of treatments programs that represented. We have Nanette there, we have the prosecutor there, all sorts of people literally get into a room and talk about each individual case to see how best we can help that defendant succeed in their probation. And obviously reduce the recidivism and help them become the citizen that we know that they can be.
How does the Warriors Trust Fund play into your court?
That was a nonprofit fund that obviously I have nothing to do with because I can't, but they came to us and said, we know that there are some veterans that are perhaps struggling because they don't have the wherewithal to get to and from treatment or to and from testing, and they can provide an Uber service, or they can provide some kind of, or they provided bus passes. They also provide incentives. For instance, if someone's doing particularly well or they've graduated to a new level, we can give them gift cards or other incentives, and that comes through the Warriors Trust as a fundraising unit, essentially. But again, I want to make it clear, completely separate from the court.
Right, absolutely, a separate entity. Thanks,
Yes.
Judge. Nanette, let's talk a little bit about what the work that you do. And can you start by saying a little bit about how you got involved with serving veterans?
I became involved in serving veterans because I had an uncle who died in the Battle of the Bulge. He left behind a little baby girl, and my father often talked about him as one of 6 brothers who grew up in foster care. And I was always very touched by the fact that, he left this little baby behind, and he is buried in Luxembourg. My brother had the opportunity to go visit his gravesite. So I learned to honor veterans through that, as well as I have a brother-in-law who served 2 tours in Vietnam.
So you really come to it from a personal space to start with.
Yes. We started 11 years ago in 2010. Director Shinseki from the Veterans Administration visited a veterans treatment court in New York, and he was so inspired how they were helping veterans. And at that time, there were over 300,000 homeless veterans, many of whom were involved in the court system or the jails. And because now millions have been spent on helping veterans find permanent housing, we have less than 50,000 homeless veterans.
That's incredible work. Nanette, you're the Veterans Justice Outreach Coordinator. Can you talk about what that means? What does that job entail?
That job entails connecting veterans in the courts and the jails with treatment. We often advocate for veterans. We hear referrals from family members, veterans themselves, psychiatrists, court staff, probation officers, and we'll advocate for these veterans to get into veterans court instead of jail sanction. And at times, even though veterans aren't involved in the Veterans Court, I'll arrange for transfers to our domiciliary or a residential program for mental health, substance abuse, or PTSD treatment, so they can get treatment instead of incarceration. So that's where the focus is.
You raise an interesting issue about people not being involved in the treatment court. So how do people come into those courts? Do they come where the judge recommends them join the court, or that a veteran reaches out? What's that process?
It's a varied process. Sometimes it's referral from a judge who identifies a veteran in the courtroom. Probation officers identify veterans. I become aware of veterans through a census at the Oakland County Jail, and also by referrals of family members or VA staff that say, this veteran is in the jail, can you do anything to help him? Or he has a hearing pending, can you help him? And that's how they're identified.
Got it. And do most of the jurisdictions have a veterans treatment court?
There are 26 veteran court in Michigan, and it is a nationwide program. There are over 550 veterans justice outreach coordinators helping with veterans courts throughout the nation, including Hawaii and Alaska. So we are very enthusiastic about connecting veterans with the veterans court instead of jail.
So if there's only 26 in Michigan, and I know there's a lot more courts than that, what's the barriers? What's the reason that we don't have them in all the courts?
I think it's because of staffing, and primarily you have a veterans court in one area. Many cities refer to that particular court. We get referrals from other cities for our courts, such as Farmington, Troy, Royal Oak, Pontiac. So we all work together in helping that veteran get connected with the court. And we usually try to share that area.
Okay, thanks. So they don't have to be in that same court necessarily to start to be able to access the veterans treatment court.
Right. Usually they have to ask the attending judge to consider transferring them to the veterans court. And that judge who is facilitating the veterans court has to agree to admit them to the court.
So Gary, I'd like to hear from you a little bit about your experience as a veteran. Can you start by talking a little bit about your military service?
Sure. I served with the 56th Field Artillery Brigade Pershing when we were fielding the Pershing 2 nuclear missiles over in Europe, which was basically the precedent for the INF Treaty to be rolled out because it extended our capabilities. And so shortly after that, our unit became unnecessary as a nuclear unit. Our missiles were destroyed, and after the INF Treaty, and so I went into the Armored Cavalry Regiment and finished up my time with the 3rd of the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment. And then when I got back, the first thing I wanted to do was get involved with the veterans organization, and as you said, we all leave our units, and when you leave that unit, it's your family, and it's almost, you feel so lost because you're used to having that structure. You're used to having all of those people around you to help, to work with and support you. And then you come back and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Because you feel so out of place. You're so used to what you do there that when you come back, you almost feel like you're in a foreign land. And like I tell so many people, when you deploy, your timelines diverge. You leave your families, and you go on your deployments. You come back 5 minutes after you left. Your family's moved on a year or 6 months or 9 months or whatever your deployment was. And so it's really tough to even just to get back into the family unit, and feel connected and feel like you're still part of that family. So you run into a lot of situations where, we live on adrenaline 24/7. We work on a minute to minute schedule instead of long term schedules, and you're doing a mission, and so when you come back, it's almost like a cognitive relearning process to be able to think long term, and to think that, and how am I going to plan this out, and how am I going to make this work for myself. And that's where programs like this come into, so much usefulness, because it lays it out for them, and they have to comply to it, and it gives it to them in baby steps. And there's other programs out there, that they get involved with even schooling and different things that, it's tough if they don't have that structure. And with the adrenaline, a lot of times, you come back, and it's just like any other stimulant. When you go without it, you look for it and you want it. And so a lot of times type A behavior starts happening where people look at you and you say, boy, this person's crazy. They're out there driving high speed on the expressway just to get a little burst of adrenaline, or they're jumping out of airplanes, or big jumping off of a cliff, or whatever the case may be. But they're looking for that adrenaline that they're missing now, in their daily lives, until they get weaned off of it. And so a lot of times, in my personal experience, that's what brings a lot of these veterans to the Veteran Treatment Court, as well as other issues, just because people don't understand what they're going through.
Right. So Gary, I know you've done a lot of work with the American Legion. Can
Mhm.
you explain what the American Legion is and how it helps veterans?
Sure. Well, the American Legion was founded during the Paris Accords in 1919, after World War I. Basically, the veterans knew that with specifically the injured veterans, and veterans that had undergone the trauma from back then, they called it, shell shock, or battle fatigue, different things, different names before it became known as post traumatic stress. And so they knew there was going to be an issue reassimilating into civilian life, and they didn't want to leave their comrades behind on the field of battle. They didn't want to leave them behind when we came home. And so they formed the American Legion, to have a veteran service organization to take care of these veterans, especially the wounded and disabled. The American Legion then went on to be the founder in a lot of great areas. Like, we were the precursor. They penned the GI Bill of Rights. They helped with the founding of the VA organization in and of itself. There's a lot of different, schooling and home loan programs and things like that the American Legion led the way on when we came home. And so it's really been an organization for veterans, to have a holistic support system and peer-to-peer support system.
Gary, in part of your work with the American Legion, you founded the Michigan Wounded and Returning Warriors Program. Can you talk specifically about what that program does?
Sure. After 9/11, I tried to reenlist like a lot of other people did. I was promptly handed a sticker, told I was too old, thanks for my time. So when I left the office and, went back later on when they raised the age limit, they handed me another sticker and said, we're not doing private service right now. Thanks for your service. And so I thought, how can I help? And the first thing I thought of is, when you're deployed, the most, weighty thing on your mind is your family and your family's welfare. So I thought, how can I keep them mission focused downrange, knowing that their family's okay, and then help them when they come back to reassimilate back into the civilian life. So we created the Michigan Wounded and Returning Warrior Program. Uh, Initially, the main thrust was to get them on all expense paid retreats, for bonding time with the family. And then through the years, those benefits expanded to provide alternative therapy methods for post-traumatic stress, to include adaptive sports, and, most recently, even clowning. And it also provided temporary financial assistance, because a lot of times when they got into those precarious financial situations, that was the doorstep to, it could go really bad, or things can, get a little bit of help and keep you on course, and your life is good. And so we started this program and had terrific support both from the community and through the American Legion itself.
That sounds amazing. Thanks so much, Gary. Gary, you're also involved in a treatment court in Dearborn. Can you talk about, from your perspective as a veteran, what's the most important elements of the treatment court program?
Well, again, like I said, a lot of times people don't understand what's going on in the head of a veteran when they come back. And when we join veteran service organizations, the community oftentimes views that as a place to drink and tell war stories, which is an important part of peer-to-peer relationships. But it's someplace where we know we're understood without having to explain ourselves. And this veteran treatment court, provides an option for us as well, because when we do get into situations where very few understand why, you get sympathetic court systems that can look at it and say, this is a direct result from something else that's almost beyond your control. And it gives us a great chance to, again, either go down that bad road and have our life spiral out of control, or get that hand up and stay on that good path and have a positive life, because we all want to give back. We all serve. There's no expiration date on our oath of enlistment. And so, when we get out, we want to help, we want to serve, we want to give back, not only to our fellow veterans, but to our communities.
Thank you, Gary. So I'd like to hear from all of you about the pandemic and how that is impacting the veterans that you're seeing. I'll start with you, Judge Grant. Have you seen an increase in cases in your combat veterans court?
I've not yet seen an increase in the cases themselves, likely because it's a little bit harder to, as I say, vet, getting those that we need into the program. Just because the system is a little bit, it's much slower now. It's a little bit harder to reach out. I will say we missed, and Nanette can probably back me up. I think I only missed one session when this first started, and then we immediately went to virtual, because the one thing that we all agreed on is that we can't let go of the whole purpose of the Veterans Court is to see each other every month or twice a month, to make sure we check in on each other, or they check in on with us. So in terms of the pandemic, that's been, I guess that's actually the hardest part, is that we've had new members join and they haven't felt that same, I don't believe they have felt the same camaraderie that the others had. They have formed that unit. So we're trying to do what we can, including 20 minutes or a half hour before we actually start session. The other veteran defendants are ordered, frankly, to be there early so they can meet in a virtual breakout room, which is completely private, completely confidential, so they can talk to each other, catch up with each other before we start the court session. That's been the hardest part, is that you don't have that socialization. That's completely probably the root of everything that we're doing with the veterans courts, in terms of making sure they have their unit, making sure that they can talk to each other. That's been the most difficult, but we've done what we can, because we want the defendants to know that we are there and we are still care. We care, and we're trying to help them make sure that they're still on the right course.
Thanks. Nanette, what are you saying from your side?
I know that veterans are very stressed by the pandemic, and there's a lot of uncertainty regarding it. The VA has tried to increase their access to treatment through telehealth sessions and telephone sessions. These include for mental health, substance abuse, and medical, where the telehealth allows like a FaceTime where the doctor and the veteran can meet through video, and the veteran can do it in the comfort of his own home. There also access is available through walk-in sessions at the John Dingo VA Medical Center on the 7th floor, Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 3 o'clock. You can receive a mental health assessment, see a psychiatrist, or get a substance abuse assessment without an appointment. So the access is very good there. We're also trying to accommodate veterans in terms of giving COVID immunizations, which you can get from a referral from your physician if you are high risk, or you can bring your identification and your DD-214 to the registration office, and you can be immunized and your spouse can be immunized.
That's wonderful to hear. Thanks, Nanette. And Gary, I'll let you kind of be the last word on this subject. What are you seeing in terms of how the pandemic has impacted the veterans you're working with?
Financially, it was really almost like a flash flood at the beginning, until a lot of the mortgage forgiveness, utility forgiveness programs started kicking in, and that really helped, quell that. So I've actually had really surprisingly less financial assistance requests than I expected because of those programs. But now that those programs are nearing their end, we're starting to see veterans come back to us. And unfortunately, some of them have a higher debt that would have been easier for us to handle earlier. But we're still working with them and trying to provide whatever services we can to them. But ultimately, as your other two guys said, it's just the lack of physical contact has been the biggest part of this whole issue. As veterans, we're very physical. We don't shake hands without hugging each other. It's it's just who we are. When you go through what you go through, that bond often sometimes is stronger than family bond, and it's hard for the family to hear that, but it's also not possible to really explain why unless they've been there. And so not having that peer-to-peer contact, the battle buddies that you can be in contact with, going through the mentor program at the treatment court, like they were talking about, being able to meet with them and know that someone really is out there and has your back, or your six, as we say in the military, and that they care about you and they care about what's happening to you. And when you're isolated and alone during the shutdown, during the quarantine, I've seen an increase in self-medication, the different ways to cope with going through those stressors. And so I think we're at kind of the tip of the iceberg, or the wave that we're going to see following this pandemic. Hopefully we're being proactive enough to kind of meet the need as it arises, but we'll have to wait and see. But overall, we have seen the concerns of hurting themselves, and the suicide threat that's there because of the isolation and feeling lost and feeling separated, and going through some of those triggers or key moments that your battle buddy would be there with you. And so we'll make it as we always did, but without programs like the Veteran Treatment Court, when things go bad, it's hard to be understood, and it's hard for the family to know what's going on. And when you think in terms of a veteran, one example, you have a family driving down the road in a car at night, they see a car coming the other way, next thing you know, the family's in the ditch, and their first response is, "What, are you crazy? Are you trying to kill us?" And the opposite is true. They're trying to do combat evasive maneuvers to protect that family from that oncoming threat. So in their minds, they're doing everything to love that family and protect that family at all costs. But it's not possible to understand that, because of that big connection, and being there and done it and been there and served. And that's the power of the veteran service organizations, these veteran treatment courts, and also educating first responders who might be the first on the scene to deal with these individuals that'll be coming through the veteran treatment court, to know what to escalate and what not to escalate, and why they're doing what they're doing. And that's powerful knowledge too.
Right. Thanks, Gary. That's important for people to know and understand, that maybe behaviors that seems surprising, we have to look a little bit deeper and understand what that is. So I want to thank all of you for joining us, and for the work that you're doing to help veterans, and really helps our whole community. We're going to put some resources up on a slide at the end of the show, so people who have questions or need resources for their family or for themselves can reach out. But I just want to thank you again for being here, and thanks all of you for joining us on Legally Speaking.